This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
All right. We are back for another Fringy episode, and we have missed each and every one of you. We are glad that you're joining us again. My wife, Kristen, is here. Say hello to everybody. We know that you guys missed her on the last one. She wasn't with us, but she's here now in the flesh, ready to go. And we've also got with us SG Anon. I know a lot of you have been waiting for this episode because last year we did a bit of an introduction to what is Q. You know, what is this whole movement that we're hearing about on the internet? We see, social media, it's all over the place. We see, on mainstream media, there's a lot of trash talk going on about what it is, this whole QAnon thing. And, you know, if you're on one side of the fence, you think it's all nonsense. If you're on the other side of the fence, you're thinking this is, the salvation of our nation, possibly. And so there's so many in-betweens. And we had SG Anon on last year to talk about just a brief overview. And now we're going to ask if he could maybe give us an understanding of what's been happening since last year and how he feels we're moving forward in this movement and what he's seeing. So I'm just going to let SG Anon introduce himself to you guys that maybe don't know him. He's been in the truther movement for a while now, and he's just he's making waves out there, and it's in a good way. So SG, how are you doing today, man?
Doing well, my friend. Thank you for having me back. It is good to be here.
Oh man, it's so good to have you, and we're so pleased that you are able to take the time. What do you see going on in the truther community right now? Because I see a lot of people kind of falling away, a lot of people getting discouraged, thinking, man, this is really taking a long time. If this Q thing is real, what's really going on here? How do you feel that we've progressed over the last year in a way that might give some people a little more of a positive spin on this whole Q movement?
Well, you know, when we talk about the Q movement, we talk about the truther movement, the online podcast community, the Great Awakening, right? We're sort of all talking about different arms of the same overall consciousness change in the world. And that consciousness change is completely unstoppable. And to what degree each one of the different arms is contributing to the forward motion or to the regression, I think that's the crux of the question that you're asking here. So I would say over the last year, we've seen a tremendous acceleration, not only in the awakening literally with people coming around to the realization that, yes, Joe Biden is a human trafficker. Yes, Joe Biden is probably not even the real Joe Biden right now in the White House, right? Everybody's sort of acknowledging that, trying to figure out what that means. The border is a bad idea. People are coming around to the awakening, right, of what's happening in the world, and they're coming around to the realization that it's all a coordinated corruption, primarily across the NATO West. And so that component of things, I couldn't be more optimistic about, right? The genie is out of the bottle forever in that regard. At this point, it's just a matter of attrition and siege warfare, outlasting the opponent and being able to deal with the dissolution and the destruction of the system that they're currently, I think, throwing at most of what we would call the global north. Now, that being said, specifically as it pertains to this idea of Q, it's difficult to iron out how successful or not successful that particular operation has been, right? Because there's different metrics that we can use to judge that. I would say overall that we've been very successful in getting people awake and aware, and even actively involved, right? Not in a protest way, although that certainly has happened, not in a violent means, but in a more civically responsive, and materially effective way down on the ground, right? And this is producing we the people whistleblowers who have gone into this civic process the last 2 or 3 years and are unearthing incredible amounts of corruption that none of the citizen journalists, due to their proximity to those types of things and the separation between those official roles and those private interests, they've not been able to iron those out. And so this is an expository process more than anything, I think, at the end of the day, and it involves the activation of people on the ground level. So I would judge that as having been extremely effective. We now have more than 1,300 chapters of local county grand juries that have been impaneled by citizens acting in accordance with common law and the original constitutional interpretation of law as it was supposed to be in the United States pre-Civil War, and what they worked very hard to drum out, right, over the last 150, 160 or so years. We've got a number of patriots that have drawn incredible amounts of attention to the child trafficking, human trafficking, and pathogen trafficking that's going on not only at the U.S. southern border, but all through the lifelines and trafficking networks coming up Central and South America, right, off from the Pacific coast, up through Ecuador, up through Peru, through Colombia, across the Darien Gap, and then up, the Central American countryside and into Mexico, then eventually into the United States. Most of the nation is now aware of how that process actually works. That's a giant geography lesson if there ever was one, right? So this entire period has really brought people, I think, to a keen understanding, a much sharper and more aware understanding of how the world actually is turning. And we're seeing the engagement of the civilian side of we the people in all of the nations in North America, Western Europe, Central America even. They're getting involved at that local level and starting to attempt to take things back. And so this has resulted in the destabilization that we've seen over the last 6 to 9 months with things like the Baltimore attack, the Moscow terrorist attack, these various events spawning off in South America, the coming conflict between Venezuela and Colombia. These types of things are marker signs of desperation as we continue to ratchet up the pressure and put more and more, pressure is really the best word, but more and more pressure and force against that deep state opponent that we have left in the bureaucratic machinations. That's when we see the responsive desperation measures, right? Those that are trying to intimidate us, to put people back into their programming, and also to move ahead with their agenda anyway. And so we've seen this, this destabilization back and forth spawned off as a result, I think, ultimately of the Q movement, the Great Awakening, and the first Trump presidency. So if we're going to judge by those metrics, specifically talking about that movement, I would say it's been a wild success.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think a lot of people have a hard time judging where all of this started, if that makes sense. Because I think if you start to work backwards on this timeline that we've been on, you start to work backwards and you're like, okay, where did all of this kind of awakening start? And I think that's very important to do, because a lot of people are like, well, we know about this and we know about this and we know about this now because we found it on the internet. But I think that they're not realizing where that first came from, right? These group of Anons on the internet that were searching for this type of stuff, and they found this account just named Q, and they started following it. And what Q was doing essentially was just giving them hints or directions to ask questions, right? There's this idea of getting on the internet and not knowing what to even look for. But if you have the right direction and the right question to ask, then you can kind of follow these lanes and find these things that you might not have found before. And I think that was really telling in the very beginning of this movement, was people didn't really know what to ask. They didn't know the questions to ask. But now, so much has come out that now we know what questions to ask. We know which directions to go, because we're kind of outside of our own box that we were in before, where we're not really paying attention to local government, not really paying attention to what's going on in big government, all of those things. Do you see how, or would you find that that's true, that this whole beginning of this was all about just asking the right questions and Q motivating people to say, hey, listen, think for yourself, ask questions for yourself?
I do think in some regards, that's the best way that we could have gone about this, quite frankly. And I think it was very near the beginning of a much broader information campaign. But the genius, I think, that was found in the Q PSYOP, and it is a psychological operation, right? That doesn't mean it's not real. It just means that the purpose for it was to, catalyze a catatonic portion of the human consciousness into essentially restarting itself. And that's exactly what we saw happen. And I think the brilliance of that was found in the curiosity component. One of the best ways to throw off an intimidation program, which is based in fear response, primarily fight or flight, hyperadrenalized state, in a brain mode where it's very difficult to ascertain what's going on in the moment, right? To break that response, one of the best and most effective ways to do that is to force the frontal lobe into a cognitive reasoning state. And the best way to do that is to ask a question. One of the best questions to ask is why? Because that engages a self-reflection process, which actually overrides fear, right? And one of the things that occurs within the brain when fear is subsided is the neurochemical transmitter saturation of the brain begins immediately in that moment to shift. You start to see the adrenal glands calm down. You start to see the brain environment begin to relax a little bit more, the ability to have a more focused, deeper vertical conversation about what might be causality, for example, or where something might be going to or coming from, right? These are all rationalizing questions that involve an investigative curiosity of some component. And so this was, I think, the absolute brilliance of the Q operation when it first came out. And one of the things that is notable about that operation is it dealt a lot with the online gamer community, which would have been focused specifically at very young groups, right? 13, 14, 15, 16 years old, all of the way up through maybe mid to late 20s. This is the youth. This is the minds and hearts of the next generation. It's also the generation that has linearly experienced the least amount of exposure to the MK Ultra military grade psychological warfare that all of the adults and other generations above and beyond that have been experiencing for a long time. So it allowed for these deep vertical questions to take hold and seed themselves out. And you saw very, very rapidly a community online, first on forum boards, then on chats, then on message forums, then on social groups, then on social media eventually. You saw this rapid coalescence of individuals all around the same, age range and basic idea and understanding of what was going on in the world. And they were exhilarated to no end to be discovering that the world indeed was not as it seems and actually more closely resembled a James Bond movie than the actual interpretation that we've been taught all of our lives. So when we look at what that brought, right, it brought activation to the generations of people here in the world, specifically the youth and the influence that that had in their social spheres and within their family units, right? It very quickly, towards the end of the Trump presidency and certainly throughout 2020 and 2021, gained a tremendous amount of steam as we saw obvious, unprecedented world events occurring in real time, people attempting to understand what the true nature of things was. People very quickly, in a short period of time, realizing that the mainstream legacy media and all of their news, digital and print publications and outlets were lying to them. So there was this seeking of information, and that seeking had been predated by about 4 years of drops, curious questions being offered, and evidence to include text messages, photographs, very incredible pictures, even from inside the White House and on board Air Force One. One of the pictures Q shared was from Hillary Clinton walking in a sacred processional with an upside down cross on Epstein Island. So we got to see an incredible amount of exposure happen to seed that ground, getting ready for that mass awakening, which was spawned off 2019 to 2021. I would argue that from that point forward, my friend, we've seen nothing but a cascading avalanche, and it's not long in the wings, I think, before it begins to really take over the world.
Yeah, I would agree. And there's such a deception also within the Q movement or in the truther community at large, where there becomes this almost echo chamber of, everybody's wanting to find the truth, and then you have these large groups of people that are trying to infiltrate that, right? As we know, anything that we try to do for good, there's going to be the enemy trying to come in and infiltrate that. And I believe that's part of the hard part for a lot of people to get fully on board with this whole Q movement, is because of those people that have come in and tried to circumvent or knock this whole thing off of its track. And, if you're saying, which I believe you, that this is a psychological warfare, in a positive direction, we also know that there's been a long going psychological warfare in the other direction, right? In the evil direction. And we know, and you mentioned MK Ultra, and we've spoken about that in the podcast before. A lot of people forget, I think, that MK Ultra is a huge part of this whole operation, getting people out of the mind control that they've been in for so long. Most people don't even consider themselves to be brainwashed in any way. They think that they're, of sound mind and sound body. And it's really hard for a person to think that they have been brainwashed. So what's your take on those people that have infiltrated, and has there been any that have infiltrated that have been caught, or any that have tried to circumvent this and make this go in the wrong direction? Have they been picking those people up too?
Well, as far as the latter part of that question, I would say that that's sort of difficult to speculate. I guess my response to that, as far as whether or not individuals that are infiltrative in nature, perhaps working on behalf of various agencies, if that has occurred, and I'm certain that has, what is the penalty for doing so during a catastrophic national emergency, which launched off a continuity of government operation in the United States, right? That's sort of an open-ended question. I'm sure that the punishment for that, or the consequence whenever it comes, is not going to be nice. Right. Now, that being said, Q actually confirmed in 2022 that we've been experiencing a number of different psychological warfare campaigns waged at the Truth Movement, specifically regarding predictions, right? Predictability and acclaimed knowledge of various angles of things that are going on in the world. And I think that a great deal of that, Rick, is probably just due to good old fashioned sensationalism, right? We're human beings who love the drama. And to what selfish aim that may have been motivated on a number of different parties, I can't begin to speculate. I can say that it has been confirmed to me at least a couple of different times that the movement does have intelligence assets that have been moved into it, right? Individuals that have a great deal of history in the intelligence community and an overlap with concerning committees and various task forces in the past. But that's not as saturative. It's not as prevalent as people would think. One of the best things, I think, to acknowledge when we're talking about infiltration and disinformation within the ranks, we're really talking about potential saboteurs. And it's important to acknowledge that in any significant people-led cultural movement worldwide at any point in history, there are always those that seek to gain just for themselves. There are those that seek to gain on behalf of the group for the good of the collective and the longevity, right? And then there are those that seek to derail that process because they actually are more profitable or productive or more satisfied in their own life when humanity is struggling. And so acknowledging that those three parties exist now, I think that's just sort of the basis of wisdom. Q actually said on November 27th, 2022, the exact drop was 4964, and it reads, be aware of false prophets. I am not a prophet. You are not a prophet. We are not prophets. Focus on the mission. And I think that's a fantastic, very short, succinct response to the idea of mis and disinformation and infiltration within the ranks. If we're focused on the mission, the infiltration will highlight itself out in due time, and we can handle it at that point.
Yeah. And I think it's important to remember that this is a military operation as it's been presented, a military operation from the very top, meaning almost like you said, a continuity of government. And we talked about that, I think, a little bit in the first episode, which is just the idea that, if there is some sort of a national emergency, as we're talking about now, where we have a president that isn't the real guy. We have, this deep state apparatus that's trying to come in and take down our country and the world, this new world order, all of these things. If you have the CIA as an example that is off doing their own missions that have nothing to do with the American people, and they're trying to further their own agenda, how do we rein these guys back in? How do you ever take an agency that's gotten that big, like the CIA, and rein that back in without using significant military force? In my opinion, do you see them maybe dismantling FBI, CIA, things like that? In the long run, yes. The answer to that question, I think, is going to be that we will arrive at a point in the next election cycle or two here in the United States where, you're going to see agencies being dragged out into a severe oversight enforcement capacity. And I think you're going to see restructuring, quite frankly, in some of them. But for the time being, I think the angle that has been worked on this, and President Trump hinted at this in 2017,
was to actually leverage the infrastructure and the personnel and the resources that the deep state has spent accumulating in the last 30 to 50 years against them inside the intelligence communities. There was a speech that President Trump gave to an incoming class of CIA officers in 2017. I think it was in May or June, where he discussed the idea of getting rid of the columns, right? And he actually comes out and he says, we're going to get rid of all these columns and it's going to be big and beautiful and it's going to be better than it ever was before, talking about the CIA's mission. Well, that could very easily be a reference to the concept of a fifth column. The fifth column means the enemy within the ranks. So understanding then that the fifth column in all of our intelligence community apparatus and our various agencies in the background in the government is primarily located at the top, then we can utilize the personnel and the manpower force available inside the agencies to actually take out the top when we set the appropriate legal scaffolding and constructs. And I think that has happened not only underneath President Trump's executive orders, Rick, but I think this entire operation militarily that's happening within and without the United States of America is operating on the fundamental basis of what President George W. Bush activated on 9/23/2001 when he leveraged the 1973 War Powers Act to unilaterally place the United States into a state of war, circumventing the Constitution and the legislative body of the Congress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's kind of a big deal, right? People don't realize that if you're just going to go past Congress and take your country to war, that's kind of a big deal. And that's what's been happening. You know, you got a lot of people that don't realize that these government aid actors they haven't had our best interest in mind. And it's really hard for I think the average American citizen to realize that you know, our presidents that we've had up until this point may have been put there on purpose. I think that's hard for people to wrap their head around sometimes, but we're seeing that in this election fraud stuff that's going on with Trump right now. And do you feel like the reason that this is going on for as long as it is, and the reason that he's going to court and all these things is to highlight how bad our elections have been for a long time?
I apologize. I lost my audio there for just a moment.
No, you're fine.
What was the last part of the question, my friend?
Sure. I was just curious if you thought that, you know, the election integrity that we're talking about and these Trump trials and all these things we've got going on, a lot of election type of stuff in culture right now, in mainstream media, is this part of the movement trying to wake people up to the idea that, you know, it's this bad. This is how it's been for a long time. And we're just now waking up to the fact that it is this bad.
I absolutely do. And I think the coordinated movement across pop culture to bring up these topics and to showcase very loudly and plainly the truth that's been in plain sight for so long is a part of that information and consciousness warfare that we were referencing just a moment ago that initially was spawned off with this Q movement. But, you know, to highlight your point, I've posted a video to the Rumble channel that I post my audio files to, which was a software programmer. It was the sworn testimony, actually, of a software programmer in 2006, identifying before an Ohio district court that he was contracted by an elected official in Florida for the 2000 election to design vote flipping software on a 5149 algorithmic scale. And it was expressly admitted to this individual that the reason for the request was because they needed to control the outcome of the vote in South Florida for the 2000 presidential election. So as soon as we started transitioning into, you know, electronic voting, which happened in the early to mid 90s and accelerated after Y2K, they were already hard at work manipulating that election. President Richard Nixon actually also knew that they had been manipulating the elections right around the time of Lyndon Johnson's presidency, but he chose to stay silent about it. And I quote, because to have acknowledged something like that in that day and time with the Vietnam War raging, it would have torn the country apart. So we've had interference and malfeasance happening in our elections for a long time here in the United States of America. And when we first, acknowledge that, it's very difficult, I think, because we live in the land of the free and the home of the brave, right? And that's what we've been taught since we were first and second graders in elementary school for a number of generations now. And while that can be true, it has actually been silently stolen away from us. And so this entire period is about reclaiming that in its truest form, a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. The The election fraud is one of the cornerstones that has enabled the extremely vast and deep crime syndicates that have existed in the underbelly and the black markets of the world for a long time. And the United States was one of the most important countries to gain control of really after the 1960s.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's such an important point because if you have presidents that are being put there with that type of power, I mean, the amount of power that the executive branch has is crazy, especially if you have a person there that shouldn't be there or wasn't elected by the citizens to be there. And so I think it's very important that we highlight that and help people understand that this has been going on for a very long time. And it's time to get to a place where we do have election integrity, where we, the people, actually do have a voice. Because you talk to a lot of people nowadays and they're like, I don't vote because I know it doesn't matter, and that's kind of the sentiment that we have throughout the nation. I guess my next question for you, if you could speculate, I guess, is why do you think it is that, I think, to be the devil's advocate a little bit, I think there's a lot of people in the nation right now that are thinking this is just a deception by another group of entities. You say it's a psyop in a positive way, trying to wake people up, but there is a lot of deception. There is a lot of, trying to hold these cards close to the chest. And for those in the military, I think understanding operational security and stuff like that is easy, but for the average, citizen, what do you say to a person that's having a hard time dealing with the deception that's coming from the quote unquote white hats or the good guys?
The first thing that I think I say to people like that is that those feelings are completely justified and valid, and I actually share them in some regards. If this were my own personal approach to things, if I could be the God of the Almighty of the universe for a moment, I think I probably would have approached this differently. But that being said, when I examine the landscape, when I look at what's occurring with DHS and just the sheer amount of pedophilia arrests that Department of Homeland Security has made in the last 12 months alone, I mean, it's over 400 different interceptions by DHS in the last 12 months. Wow. And going back to 2021, we eclipsed more than 1,100. So that alone, how many children have now been prevented from falling into child and human trafficking slavery as a result of the destruction of some of those local cells, right? The biological pathogens that have happened, that Putin has found in Ukraine, has been able to destroy very surgically and methodically in this process, ensuring that they didn't break out into the worldwide biome and the worldwide, that overall environment. I think that also is worthy of noting and remembering here. So I guess what I would say is that the deception I fundamentally don't agree with. I'm more of a deontologist in some regards, I guess, when it comes to honesty and dishonesty, and I think that there's a frequency sacrifice that is made. I think that there's a spiritual bunt, quite frankly, that's getting made, a sacrifice bunt whenever you choose to utilize deception, even if that deception is for positive purposes. But I will say that it has the net effect of hiding in plain sight for all of the world to see the obvious progression forward of some sort of good force that is working within the background to intercept these human trafficking cartels, to destroy these biological pathogen trafficking channels and networks across boundary lines, right, in Eastern Europe, for example, and in Sub-Saharan Africa. And it's allowing at the same time the deception of those very deep state opponents that have been living in a deceptive orientation towards all of mankind for a very long time. For the first time, they don't know where is safe and where is not safe. They don't know if something's going to come into their home and draw them out in the middle of the night or not, right? They're now the ones looking over their shoulder. So in some regards, I will say I think there is a positive spin that comes off of it. But fundamentally, it's just a really difficult question to answer. And I think when Q says at different points along the way that, quote, it had to be done this way, I think that's actually part of the acknowledgement coming out of that statement, is that there are steps taken that the world would not have approved of, but the longevity and survival of humanity is truly at stake.
Yeah, and it's really hard to be an armchair quarterback from my couch and say, I think that this needs to go faster, and I think that it should be done this way, because it would be really easy for me to do that. But I think that there is a large portion of this whole movement and this whole plan, I think, is based on information, right? And he who holds the information gets to make the rules or gets to be in control. And that's what we've seen all throughout history. The people with the most information, the truth, get to do with that truth what they will, even if that is deceiving those in their own nation, those that are close to them. They use that deception in order to keep the truth from us. And so, if you're going to give the truth back to the people, how do you do that in a way that's not going to hurt the people in the process? How do you do that in a way that's not going to cause uproar in the communities? Do we want riots? Do we want civil war? No, of course not. And I think that's a large portion of why it's being done this way, if I was to speculate. But, I think it is an important thing to note that information, that the person that controls the information is the one that gets to make all the rules. And so when Q or this movement or the military that's part of this, if they have information that we don't about why it had to be this way, who are we to really say, well, I think it needed to be done differently, in my opinion, because it's all about information. How do you get the information out to the people without hurting the people that you're trying to give the information to? And I think that's a hard, teeter-totter to be on, if you know what I'm saying there.
I do. And I think that you would also be perfectly valid and justified in some regards as a we the people patriot who's waking up to the reality of just what the heck has been going on in the world for the last 200 to 500 years. I think that you would be valid in saying, well, if you have information that I don't, why don't you just give it to us? And at the same time, I would refer, I think, those individuals to the exact same statement I made a moment ago. If we are also recipients of it, and I understand that, and I appreciate that for what it is, then anyone that is left within our own ranks that is not on our side now has a major advantage in getting ahead of the curve of a potentially interceptive operation that would actually stop a large amount of criminality that hypothetical individual may or may not be part and party to. And this does exist right down into our local communities, right? It exists at our county clerk level in some regards. It certainly exists within county coroners and Secretary of State offices. It exists within various departments of health, right? So this massive operation, if we can use that terminology, to distribute truth to the people in a way that does not destroy their consciousness and actually allows them to move through an elevative process, a growth process where there's a lot, I think, of intimacy that gets drawn up with our Creator, right? Because we are created beings in this process as well. I think that is a very noble idea. And even though it's being done in perhaps a way that a lot of people have valid and justified questions for, one thing that can be said in this process is that humanity has had the opportunity to come around gingerly rather than being splashed with a bucket of water right in the face. Yeah.
And you make a huge point about the children. They're picking up pedophiles even like last week, they're picking up these guys all the time. And we're talking about, I've read articles that are like people working for the fire department, people working for the post office, people that are like Sunday school teachers, all of these type of things they've infiltrated everything. If you're talking about pedophilia, these guys are trying to hide in the shadows, and you don't want these guys to get away. In my opinion, operational security in the military is such that you don't give out the information so that the bad guys get away, as you're saying. And so I think that's a great point to make. And hopefully that helps some of the listeners out there that are struggling with that. Kristen, did you have any questions for SG before we move into anything else?
I think my biggest question is probably, so we had the whole election fraud thing, and then the documentary that came out about the ballots and, all that kind of stuff. But then it seemingly to the regular Joe Schmoes, nothing has happened. And so what does this upcoming election cycle look like from the lens of we had very obvious, election fraud previously? So how has that been rectified? How do we Because I've heard a lot of people that kind of like what Rick was saying, just like, oh, I'm just not going to vote anymore because it doesn't matter. And even if they steal an election, they don't do anything about it. So what do you think this upcoming election cycle is going to look like?
That's probably the question on the lips of everyone right now. And I have to come out and admit that barring a complete redirection and reorientation in the usage of the electronic voting machines, I don't think that we're going to arrive at an election season in November in any significant sense. And the reason I say that is because if we assume for a moment the hypothetical context for our discussion is that we have both good actors and bad actors that are attempting to vie for control in this process and stay out of the public eye because they can literally get more accomplished that way, then it's not in either of those parties' interests to allow this to go all the way to the election. For one, as you highlighted just a second ago, very articulately, I think that a major concern is that a lot of awakened patriots now have lived through a 3-cycle cheating process, right? 2020, 2021, 22, and 23. So technically a 4-cycle process, depending on where you may have lived here in the United States of America. Those individuals in all of those communities and localities have personally experienced at least 2 election cheats and steals that have been very obvious, right? The Hobbs governorship is a clown show if there ever was one. We all know who won that, that particular election. Yeah. So in that acknowledgement, we have a very large group of people that if we go into the night of November 4th or the night of November 3rd leading into the 4th and the 5th this year, and nothing has changed from the present circumstances that we're discussing now, you're going to have a lot of patriots that just won't go. At the same time, I think from the other community side of things, enough people are going to turn out anyway, no matter what occurs, that the other side would have to cheat so magnanimously that it would be impossible to keep that in the bottle, even with the mainstream media, right? It would just be would just be completely impossible to shield the amount of, quite frankly, insurrection that was being carried out in real time in front of everyone's eyes. So I think you're actually going to see the Manchurian administration try to stop this process by fomenting the flames and fog of war over the summer months. And how that looks, that's an entire other philosophical discussion and a speculative prediction situation. But I don't believe that we can arrive at November this year in any significant way of normality that we have in ages past. And I don't think it's in anyone's interest to allow it to go that direction.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And it's hard to say, and you've got all kinds of people talking about the Supreme Court. Why isn't the Supreme Court stepping in and saying, this is election integrity, election fraud. It's pretty plain to the average American citizen that there's been a lot of tomfoolery going on, but there's nothing in the Supreme Court at this time that's like, hey, we need to overturn this. But from that question, I want to say, as a speculative, what do you think would happen if the Supreme Court did overturn this election? What would that look like?
Well, it's very interesting that you should say that, because there's a number of docketed cases that have been brought, and writs of certiorari that have been filed to try and get on the docket for the Supreme Court discussing this very issue. Captured, public officials without, valid oaths of office on file. There's been a mound of evidence that has made its way through a very corrupt judiciary and has actually made it to the moat, if you will, around the castle that is the Supreme Court, if I can utilize the metaphor. So what becomes of that as we go forward, I think that could be very pivotal, and it would absolutely be one of those counterintelligence warfare moves, because those types of moves always come out of left field. You're literally trying to do the most unexpected thing in a counterintelligence operation. So, and I purport that that's the basis of some of this. So for the sake of speculation and hypothesis, if we saw the court invalidate and throw an election back to the states, which I think is how that would have to go, we would see state legislatures that would then act in accordance or not, right, with returning that elector. And the real component and the real kick here would be, what would the Pentagon do? What would the Department of Defense do? Because in the acknowledgement that we have an unlawful and wrong president, quite frankly, then we sort of implicitly acknowledge that we also have the wrong CIC for the armed forces of the United States. So if the military were to then come out and issue a public statement, say with a number of generals in the background discussing that, they were aware of this the entire time, but they didn't want to involve themselves in civil society, They wanted to allow this to move through society. Society has now spoken, so they're going to move in and swear allegiance to Donald Trump. Then I think you would have a situation occur in the United States of America where anyone that was left on the deep state opponent's side would launch all of the fireworks in their wagon, trying to get everyone distracted and keep that truth from coming out. And we could very easily see a swift movement, of National Guard in a law enforcement capacity after some sort of ceremonious announcement like that, and an emergency enacted here in the United States just to get a handle on things. This is speculative, but I don't see this as being completely unreasonable, Rick. You've got the people of the United States that don't want an overt military coup. At the same time, pretty much everyone is willing to acknowledge that these out-of-control federal and state law enforcement agencies are not going to police themselves, and they're being manhandled and puppeteered by election fraud bozos who themselves got puppeteered into office. So everyone is looking at this and acknowledging that we do need some sort of clean out. We need an exterminator to come into the home and handle the pests, but we don't want the exterminator to come running in the windows and kicking in the door and doing it in a violent and I think frightening manner. So in our speculative discussion here, I think we could definitely move in a direction like that, and it would certainly etch into history a Supreme Court precedent, which would be exportable, I think, worldwide by the time it was all done.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you walking through that, because it is important to note that is a possibility. It's not necessarily done, obviously, but it is a possibility, and what that would look like for the average American citizen. I think people are worried about this world flipping into some sort of a civil war. And I don't know if we have to worry about that as much. I like to help people understand that I don't think that they want it to go there. And I think that they've put a lot of things in place to ensure that it doesn't go that direction. Another thing that I wanted to ask you, SG, and I appreciate you taking this time, is Trump is a big deal, right, in the world right now. He's on trial for many different things. He is kind of the MAGA movement, and he's really a person that is either loved or hated by a lot of people. And I think for this, a lot of people have a hard time with the movement because of the person at the head or Trump. And I think people have been misled about Trump in a lot of ways. A lot of things have been said about Trump that are not true, which is like we were talking about earlier, whoever controls the information gets to say whatever they want. But I think what's your take on Trump, and what would you say to people that are like, I don't mind Q, I just can't stand Trump?
I think I would acknowledge to those folks that that's totally justified, and even I can understand that, because at the end of the day, while my opinion about Trump, comes from a different lens, the man is just rude sometimes. and I think to acknowledge that and to realize that is part of the personality, and that we are all human and that we're not perfect, I don't see anything wrong with that. That being said, what we have right now, I think, is a choice between a personality and a guy that we just don't personally like, and a uniparty that is bent on world destruction. And so between those two choices, I'm willing to look at the less desirable choice and acknowledge it for what it is, as far as being, a preferential candidate, but still one who is willing to come to the box on my behalf, on our behalf, on the behalf of, we the people here in America, just like Orban does in Hungary, just like Le Pen, has tried to do in France now for a number of years. And then I think I would try to put my own, personal opinions aside long enough to acknowledge that he had a successful presidency before, a very successful economy. No one can argue that. We did have a secure border and a much better situation as far as law enforcement in the United States. We did have demonstrably lower crime rates. And yeah, some of the policies that the Trump administration undertook, even I personally, Rick, wasn't a large fan of at first. And some of them I'm even still not a huge fan of as we look at the period of time we're living through right now. But by and large, the quality of life and the standard of living and the expectations of every man, woman, and child in America improved and became more positive under President Trump. And so, for all of his faults and all of the different, issues that I have with the man, and there certainly are some even nowadays, I look at the landscape and I look at the various options out there, and I think to myself, my only real safe harbor when it comes to a choice for the next president of the United States is going to be Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
I always tell people I don't really care about his personality that much as long as he's doing his job. If you can do your job and run the country the way that you did, you got my vote.
Yeah, it's not really a popularity contest when it comes to the president. In my opinion, it should be, can the guy do the job? And is he willing to do the job no matter what the haters say? It's about the people, we the people. And he seems to demonstrate that. I get that a lot too myself. I say some wild things here and there and people are like, come on, man, you can't say that. And so I understand his mean tweets really hurt people's feelings and stuff like that. But it's interesting if you go back and look at his mean tweets now, knowing what you know now, years later, they're actually pretty spot on. So it's interesting. It's an interesting way to kind of look back. I think for a lot of people that are looking at this Q movement, I think they're forgetting everything that's happened up until this point. Because as you stated several times, this has been like a 3-4 years now that people are having to deal with all of this hardship. We forget everything that we've been through and everything that's happened to Trump and everything that's happened to the world. We're talking about COVID and vaccines and all these things for a very long time have been going on. And I think it's been so overwhelming that people forget exactly what all we've been through. And to the point that we're at right now, I think we're actually at a very good place. We're getting a lot of this election integrity taken care of. We're getting a lot of this medical system malfeasance and all the ridiculousness that's going on there out into the light, and people are paying attention to it. Pedophilia has been highlighted at a very high level. Hollywood and all of its interactions with pedophilia and satanic rituals has been highlighted. There's been so much that's come out this last 4 years. To say that there's nothing going on and nothing is happening behind the scenes is, in my opinion, that's a little too elementary for me. You have to think higher and you have to remember what we've been through. And so all of that being said, how do you see, and again, I love to ask speculative questions, but speculative questions for me are, what type of information have you gathered to think that this might be the way that things are going? How do you see something like this even wrapping up? How do you potentially see an end to this? Because a lot of people are like, when is this going to end? If this is a movement, if this is a movie, you hear a lot of people say it's just a movie, just grab your popcorn, eat your popcorn, everything's fine. But I think a lot of people are like, okay, but how does the end of this movie start? When do we get back to our lives and get to be living in freedom? So what do you think that looks like, or how do we get there? What has to happen?
Well, honestly, I think my answer to the question, as annoying as it might be, is that we're already in that process now, right? We're already seeing a reshaping of the workforce, the introduction of AI. We're handling these societal questions now of, do we even really need to do entry-level jobs? That opens up the idea of, well, what credentials should we be pursuing 16, 17, 18 years old, 19 years old, moving into the workforce? So, the overall thing of when is this over and when do we go back to our lives, I think we're already there in that sense. However, the spirit, I think, of the question here is, when are we going to get public justice, and when can we acknowledge that we're in now a new phase? And I think that is going to come, quite frankly, as a result of the events of this year and how we move from this year and this supposed election cycle or not into early next year and the 2025. We're now halfway through the decade, right, moving towards 2030. Personally, I think that we're going to, and again, this is speculative in nature, but
sure,
with the events happening in the world and how this is symbolically tied, I think, in a lot of ways to the vision that President Kennedy had for the United States and for the Western world, right? President Kennedy was the first president after the central banksters overthrew the United States in the background to try and go against that model. And he was resoundingly shut down, of course, as a result of that attempt. But looking at the spirit of how that actually played out, I think that it's likely for us to see a Cuban Missile Crisis style situation here in the United States, or potentially even a combo of a missile crisis and some sort of domestic event in the same spirit of 9/11. And And I think that's going to drive us to a point where the United States is going to, again, we're going to have a pause of some kind. And this could be in tandem or right around the same time, for example, as that Supreme Court announcement in speculative discussion that we were discussing just a moment ago. If you were to have, a Supreme Court announcement, say, on a Friday or on a Sunday, moving into the week, and then see a number of different crisis events in the days follow that, 4 or 5 days, after that, that's not a long time elapsed for a great deal of things to stop and shift and change.
Sure.
After World War II, we saw an international coalition tribunal, and we saw a discussion not only in Nuremberg, but in other tribunals that happened elsewhere across Europe at the same time about how the war began. Who was actually responsible for this? How did this happen? Why are we here? I think the same idea is going to come, and it's going to be bigger and grander than anything that happened in post-war Europe. I think it's going to be a coalition of all of the nations, the member states of the United Nations, essentially throwing off the United Nations membership in favor of a new decentralized world order, if I can utilize the term. And forgive my terminology, it's not the best words here, but a decentralized globalistic model that amplifies individual sovereignty, but also our interconnectivity. And our interconnectivity is something that is here to stay. It's the information age, quite frankly, that has made throwing off the deep state complex worldwide even possible. Yeah. So looking at this, my friend, and the idea, when can we acknowledge we're in the next phase? When can we acknowledge that there has been public justice dealt? I think that public justice is not going to be a singular event. I think it's going to be a series of different high-profile court cases, high-profile coalition tribunals that will occur across Europe, in North America, and I think in Africa and South America as well. And everyone is going to sort of publicly acknowledge in real time that the world was walked all of the way to the brink of a nuclear war to serve the financial interests of about 0.5% of the population of the planet. And no one, I think, is going to appreciate that. And then from that point forward, right, we can have the international discussion and the domestic discussion. How do we rebuild? What do we replace this system with? How does it look? And that's the brilliance of the period of time that we're in right now. We've been at the drawing board as patriots across the landscape and across society in every discipline and every profession, across every significant arena, going really all the way back 4 or 5 years at this point, designing and brainstorming and attempting to come up with what viable replacement options for the systems that we've been entrapped in may actually be. And some of them are actually taking hold. So I'm very, very excited to see where this goes. And I think when we arrive at that pause, that international acknowledgement that things have been absolutely crazy and that our governments are being returned to the, the command and the charter, the charge of we the people, I think that those systems and this period of brainstorming that we've been living in right now are going to be amplified and rolled in. And I think that we're going to move very quickly into a decentralized, much more sovereign way of life here in the United States and in the rest of the world.
Amen. I couldn't agree more. And I think that's a large part of that has to do with the financial system. And you spoke about that briefly, just, whoever controls the financial system, that 5%, 6% is really not wanting to let that go. Right. And we've seen executive orders and different things over time. And we're witnessing the fall of the stock market before our eyes each and every day, and the collapse of the dollar, all these things. I mean, if this economy crashes, it's going to be a shock to the system of a lot of people. And that just seems to be the direction that we're going. The stock market falling seems like a matter of days. Do you see that?
I don't know as I'd be quite as predictive, but the turn down in the market itself has been going now for a long time. We just saw another failure of a significantly sized regional bank. And when you actually count up the deposits that were contained within that bank, the official figure that's been reported is right around 600 million as far as FDIC responsibility, but the deposits were more than $2 billion. So This is a significant collapse that occurred just within the last 7 to 10 days, right? And the worldwide financial system, which emanates out of Wall Street, North America, and the United Kingdom, has been, pressed essentially in every conceivable fashion since the launch of the Joe Biden installation. We've throttled its resources around the world by launching off conflict. Putin, of course, is very instrumental in that with Eastern Europe and the amount of gas and raw material that actually comes out of Russia. The relationship with China has soured, between the United States and China. We've witnessed both Russia and China forging multilateral alliances throughout the BRICS nations. 6 of the 9 largest oil-producing countries in the world are now part of the BRICS nations. Iran, which has control of essentially 60% of the Strait of Hormuz, is now within the BRICS nations. Iraq has told the Federal Reserve to get out of the country basically as of January 1. And there's rumor that the Iraqi dinar is now beginning to revalue slowly in trade with specific other nations, right? It's not revalued fully against the dollar yet, but estimates put that anywhere from $3 to 4 dinar per $1 US, which would be an extraordinary revaluation rate based on where the dinar has been for the last 20 years. So these changeovers that are occurring in the financial system and in the geopolitical landscape worldwide are having the net effect of draining the blood out of the beast. If you can't kill all 10,000 heads because they'll just regrow faster than you're able to kill them, the only way to drop the beast is to drain the blood out of it. In that fashion, none of the heads can operate or function, and we're seeing that happening worldwide right now, and that process, I think, is actually due to escalate. But the net effect, and I keep using that term because there is a penalty that gets paid in that process, is the liberation of our financial system from basically what amounts to a tax slavery here in the United States. The United States tax code is more than 85,000 pages long. That tax code encompasses an amount of slavery that I don't think you could read in a generation, right? I don't think you would be able to fully quantify and sum that up in a docuseries over a course of many years. So being able to remove that system from its effectiveness and from its entrenchment in the Western world and still allow for the transition to a better financial system, one that is valued outside of fiat currency, has a true asset or a true standard of value, regardless of what the asset is, behind the currency itself. That is, I think, the process that we're living through. But it produces, again, there's that net effect, right? It produces that net effect of pain and suffering in that old fiat system, because that fiat system is literally dying. And it reaches a point where it's no longer sustainable in its own right. And so something to replace it has to be, I think, prepared and in the works. And if we're to believe any of what we've been told over the last 3 to 4 years, this process has been underway since Donald Trump's administration. President Trump made the statement in 2018 when he was at a press conference with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe of Japan, that the United States would be on a level playing field with currency manipulation very soon. So I think that's much more than just the Asian, spin on it, which is what he was putting at the time, isolating China. It's the currency manipulation worldwide by the fiat monetary system ad hoc. And being able to level the playing field involves destroying the old system and preparing a new one to come into its place. We saw President Trump back the Federal Reserve into the Treasury in 2020, the first time in history that had ever been done. And for the first time, the U.S. Treasury, and that includes the Secret Service, because the Secret Service mission was initially based out of securing the Treasury during the Lincoln administration in the mid-19th century. It gave the Secret Service and the Treasury access to the Federal Reserve's ledger. And so being able then to reconcile all of that, decide how to progress forward and replace that system with a new system, a new balance book that reflects the old balance book, but is based on a fair idea value exchange, that I think has been the entire process, right? And that process I don't believe is not yet complete, because we're witnessing the continual disconnection very slowly, very delicately, very methodically of the African nations, the South Asian nations, the archipelago nations, from the U.S. aid arm, from the U.S. dollar, dependency on U.S. food, U.S. grain, these types of things, and Russia, China, Egypt, other very large powers in regional locations are coming in, and they're essentially supporting those poorer nations that have had that impoverishment as a result of being involved with the U.S. dollar. So as we slowly disconnect the tentacles, elsewhere from around the planet, we're also disconnecting the arteries. Tentacles and arteries is sort of tantamount to the same thing here. The beast eventually arrives at a point where it's near near death and it's ready for the kill shot. And I think that's going to be when you see the system in North America and Western Europe actually flip.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for breaking that down for people, because it is a very interesting process that has been going on for a long time. It's just been kind of behind the scenes, and it's hard for people to make those connections, as we said, because things have been going on for so long. When you say Trump did these things in 2018, a lot of people don't even know that he did that, or don't remember. And so great points that you've made. Well, SG, this has been such an awesome conversation. We were a little bit leery to have you back on because last time you had hurt your back when we had you on, and I didn't want to cause any more harm to you in any way. But well, we're so thankful that you're feeling better, and that you're continuing to be a voice of truth and for the people, because it's such a confusing time that we live in, and the way that you explain things and break things down is obviously very palatable for the people, because people really flock to you. So if people are hearing you for the first time here on this episode, where can they find you, for those that are looking?
I can be found, and thank you for having me back, by the way. I can be found now at 3 places online. I'm on Truth Social at the handle Real SG Anon with a red check mark. I'm on X, formerly Twitter, the handle TheQ News Patriot with a blue check mark. Username is SG Anon. And then I'm on Rumble at Q News Patriot, rumble.com/user/Q News Patriot. I am not on Rumble by SG Anon.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much, man. We're hoping all of God's blessings are going your way and on your family. We hope that a continued hedge of protection around you and all that you love. And we hope that God is going to continue to clean up this nation and clean up this world, and we'll be able to see some of that fruit here very soon. Thanks again, brother.
Amen, my friend. Great sentiments to close on, and I think that we are the generation that makes that happen.
I couldn't agree more. Take care, and we'll talk to you on the next one. Thanks, guys. If you want to find SG, go find him where he just mentioned, and give him a like, give him a subscribe, 5-star reviews, all those things, because he is doing great work, and we hope to see you guys all on the next one. Until then, stay fringy, my friends.